Welcome to Conquering Your Financial Future, the podcast for Your Wealth Hub. My name is Gavin Glozier. I'm the founder and director of Your Wealth Hub. And I'm here today with Steve Wright from Your Wealth Hub as well. And our job today is to decipher what was a really interesting budget last night. And if you were like many people, or potentially not many people, who endured the 30-minute budget speech and then following that many interviews about what the budget means to average Australians, we thought we would take an opportunity to probably pull out the best parts of what was in the budget last night and how potentially it would be impacting your life. So, Steve, from your perspective, you've sat through many budgets years gone by, and I suppose overall, how would you describe the budget from last night?
I think, Gavin, we can see an election is looming. So there was more good news, I think, than bad news. But like always, often the devil can be in the detail. Yeah,
absolutely. I think, I know from my perspective, it was an interesting budget where I don't think they tried to upset too many people. And if anything, there's a little bit in there for everyone to keep people happy, I would suggest.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely some good news that many of our clients will get an immediate benefit from, on the assumption they all go through.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. It is, at this stage, still not legislated, so until the upper and lower house does pass legislation. Early thoughts on what you think the other side will say about this?
Look, I think we know Australian politics, and we would expect that the Labor Party will be have some commentary, particularly around some of the tax cuts, the ones that are 7 years out. Generally, budget forecasts are for 3 to 4 years, so this is a little unusual, and I'd suggest there'll be some commentary around that. But I think, from what I saw from Chris Bowen's initial comments last night, I think they felt that there was some positive things for taxpayers.
Yeah, absolutely. There was definitely some positive talk. I think, to be honest, it seemed to have taken them by surprise somewhat, some of the areas as well, being a little bit more passive than perhaps they would have wanted to. And if anything, for the other side, it may have encroached on some of their territory on what they would often do in different budgets. So, yeah, very interesting time. So, look, we've put together a list of 5 key areas, and we're going to release an infographic that will be on this podcast. If you happen to click on the links connected to this, we've got an infographic that's going to take us through 5 different areas. We're going to focus on impact to small business. We're going to talk about the superannuation changes that were announced last night. We'll talk about the big one, which was around the tax cuts, and there's been some really interesting ways that they've actually delivered these tax cuts. So we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll talk about aged care, and that was definitely one of the benefactors of last night's announcement. And we'll talk about how that has how the pensioners in general will be also kind of benefiting from the budget announcement. So Steve, let's talk about the small business owners kind of segment at the moment, and good to see the $20,000 tax depreciation, or the write-off, is going to extend for 1 more year. That must be a huge boost to small business owners.
You would think so, Gav. I mean, that's an issue that my understanding has been pretty well received by the small business community. So it allows people to spend $20,000 and have an immediate tax write-off in terms of that asset. It was going to run out, I believe, this financial year, so it's been extended for another one. So that, again, provides an opportunity for small business to purchase much needed capital items for their business and get an immediate tax write-off, as opposed to writing it off over a number of tax years.
I was amused at the first time this was announced, and the amount of cars that came onto the market that just fell under the $20,000 mark. It was amazing. It was almost like it coincided.
Not sure what you're getting at there, Gav. I can't imagine anyone would play those types of games.
No, exactly right. One of the pieces of legislation proposed last night was to ban the payments, or receiving payments for over $10,000, which I think will be an interesting one. And I think quite clearly they're trying to do some work in capturing potential tax loopholes where people have tried to avoid declaring income or earnings in that space because of the way cash is traded hands. What's your thoughts on that, Steve?
Yeah, absolutely, Gav. Obviously, they're addressing what they've termed the black economy in a number of areas, but I think for those many people, with the changing nature of employment these days and more people contracting their services, it's really important that you're aware that if you are paying somebody for those services, if that amount's more than $10,000 and you haven't paid PAYG or withholding tax, you can't pay them in cash above those amounts. So there's lots of different rules that are coming in around that to try and, if you like, put more robustness around collecting the tax responsibilities. So for those of you who are in that space, we'd certainly encourage you to work with your accountants to understand what those impacts are.
Yeah, I think it's going to really impact some of the blue collar markets as well, particularly the building trade and trades. I know we kind of joked around that perhaps there'll be a lot more smaller invoices being on offer, or potential extra invoices for smaller amounts, etc. Going forward. But I think that's going to really shake up potentially how people expected to pay for goods previously. I know there was talk around deterring terrorist activity and kind of that underground black economy, as you suggested before. But I think it will have an impact onto smaller business at the same time.
It just comes down to, I suppose, if you are in that scenario, it's meaning that you've got an extra level of responsibility that you didn't have, which means that if you don't meet the administrative requirements, for those who are even doing the right thing and saying, well, the responsibility might be to the party that I paid, not me paying it, you need to be aware of what your obligations are in that regard.
Yeah. Let's move on to superannuation changes. And the government were pretty strong last night in coming out and talking with some very strong words, and they did try to make a stand on exit fees for superannuation funds. And in the past, there have been these residual funds, probably from years gone by, that do have exit fees. The statement last night was that they want to ban any exit fees, allowing people to move freely between superannuation funds as people choose. So now that's a big call, because I know from years gone by there have been some very early superannuation funds, Steve, that had some pretty significant fees that you're aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I've seen fees as high as 30 and 40%
of a fund balance.
Yeah, I'm pleased to say that those types of funds are far less in existence these days, but we always say to people you need to do your homework when it comes to that. Look, we know the superannuation industry often gets tinkered with, and there's been lots of changes over the last decade. I think the really strong message here is that there's no significant changes to the fundamentals of the system, and what the government done is actually encourage people to look at their superannuation, if they've got more than one superannuation account, and have a look at whether it might be appropriate for them to bring them together. And what they've said to superannuation funds is from July 2019, you can't charge an exit fee for somebody wanting to close their account and transfer it to another one. So to me, that's a very big positive. There was also some other protections, if you like, put into place. So smaller account balances, less than $6,000, there's a capping of fees of a maximum of 3%, which is also great. Means that account balances aren't eroded. And also the insurance that people often receive when they start a superannuation fund through an employer. If you're under 25, you won't automatically get the life cover and have those premiums deducted from your account, when at that age it may not be appropriate to you. So I think some really positive areas addressed by the government in terms of superannuation.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. The insurance one for people under 25, depending on what type of insurance we're talking about, typically life, TPD, income protection, is often the only way those people do actually get cover. So I think there's a double-edged sword for doing that. And I think for people who are concerned or are interested, it is about having a conversation with someone to find out where they stand and what is appropriate cover for them, which is often the case. Yeah,
absolutely. But I think again, perhaps those starting out, casual employees, still students, or premiums often can eat away. So you're right, Gavin's right. It's about that balance between, do I need it, and if so, what type of cover do I need? And we'd always encourage people to consider that in their own circumstances and get some help.
Absolutely. Look, the centrepiece of the budget last night did appear to be firmly on tax cuts. And what the government have tried to do here is try to introduce the concept of a simpler tax system. And over the years, different governments have tried this, not been too successful, but it is clear that they do want to. The Morrison budget did want to focus on trying to simplify for tax cuts, and as a result, for people earning up to $90,000, they want to offer a $530 in year one tax rebate as opposed to removing the current tax threshold. So, from your perspective, Steve, quite a smart way of doing that, I think.
Yeah, so typically a lot of the criticism that I guess governments on this side of the fence have received has been when they've offered tax incentives in the lower tax brackets. They're saying, yes, that does benefit those on lower incomes, but it also flows through to those on higher incomes because of the way our tax system works, and that we have tax brackets, and depending on what you earn will determine ultimately what you pay. The way they've done these tax changes, a lot of it is done via a tax offset as opposed to a tax cut, which means it really is targeted at those people that they want to target, so lower and middle income. So anyone earning less than $37,000 gets an additional offset of $200, and then anyone earning between $48,000 and $90,000 will get a tax benefit of $530. So that's a fairly significant, it's about $10 a week. And if you're a member of a couple and both of you in that scenario, that's an extra $1,000 a year into the household. And above $90,000, it kind of gets scaled down, that offset. So basically anyone earning more than just over $125,000 receives no tax benefit in the next financial year. So again, really directing it at, I guess, as I said, those areas that they're trying to target.
Yeah, and I think, we were talking before about a very political budget. This one was, that's really the heartland of the opposition at the moment, and where their constituencies are sitting. So you would expect that they're trying to swing, I suppose, some influence in that space.
Yeah, I think absolutely we need to acknowledge that is very much directed at voters in that segment, and as we commented at the start, we can smell an election just around the corner.
Yeah, absolutely. I think kind of the interesting part of this is it doesn't just stop there. They want to remove effectively the 37 cent in the dollar tax bracket over time, so you're basically left with the upper tax bracket now, which will extend up to $200,000. Where did they say this one would go to? The 32 cent, was it up to 120?
Yeah, so really interesting here that the government has laid out effectively a 7-year income tax plan in terms of our tax brackets, etc. There's some further changes they've proposed, I think, in 2020 and 21. But ultimately what they're looking to do is they'll increase the lower threshold of 19 cents from 37 to 41. That next bracket, which is currently 32.5 cents, that will increase from its current level of 87. It's going to 90 next financial year. It's going to extend by 24, 25 to 120, which basically means, and I think all the way through, to 200,000. And then the highest tax bracket, which is currently 180, will extend to 200. So that's a fairly, that's trying to target, I guess, the majority of taxpayers, and I think there's a statistic around that will by then impact 94% of taxpayers. So it's that top 6% who are on the highest marginal tax rate who, I guess, are not targeted as much as part of these measures.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 94% of people paying no more than 32.5 cents in the dollar is pretty significant, and it does make for a simpler tax system when you look at it that way. And they we're talking about the statistics last night. When you consider that if people are earning an average wage, if you're looking at that $30,000 to $40,000 mark very early on, and if they progress through their career, and if they're not exceeding $200,000, they will in fact be on the same tax rate for the rest of their life. So it's an interesting one. The other one worth pointing out that was bantered around the last couple of years was the increase to the Medicare levy. Now, quite interestingly, it obviously copped a lot of flack over the last couple of months over this, and they've decided to not increase the Medicare levy to 2.5%, so it's staying as put. So, albeit it was expected that something would change, obviously it hasn't gone through. So, I think that's a welcome relief to a lot of people.
Yep, and so again, it's effectively a 0.5% tax reduction for the majority of taxpayers.
Yeah, absolutely. Aged care fared really well last night, and for people who are themselves looking to move into an aged care facility, or in fact have children who are looking to place parents or loved ones into aged care facilities, I thought it was a great initiative to start with. Inject $1.6 billion of funding for approximately 14,000 home care packages. So the ability to have that extra type of care, but to make it more accessible, I think that's quite a good move.
No, absolutely. I mean, we all know we've got an ageing population. There's been lots of commentary about, I guess, being under-resourced in that area, and I think it's probably been overdue, but absolutely the government has addressed this in a very large way, and some ambitious goals in terms of additional places and the package that they announced last night. So very positive, I think, for that sector. And all of us, are getting older, and I'm sure most of us have been exposed to, whether it be older parents or grandparents. That is a very real aspect of what we're all going to be faced with down the track, so it's great that there'll be extra services to support that.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting there, Steve, as well, that the statistic, so I'll come on the statistic in a moment, but first and foremost is that the other statistic of interest was that the top end of the baby boomer age bracket right now is age 84. So, I think for many, many years we've talked about these people as being, the emerging kind of segment into retirement, but that time has most certainly passed, and now they're looking at post-retirement facilities. And when we've got such a large portion of our population in that bracket, we're going to be hearing more about aged care in the years to come in the budget, as we start seeing it as a large portion of the way the budget is divvied up. Another really good point to make was funding around supporting mental health in aged care facilities, and quite a scary statistic that for males who are over the 85, there is a significantly higher compared to other demographics suicide rate at that point, which I wasn't aware of. So really, really interesting to hear that, and great to see the government identifying that there's more work to be done in that space, which I think is exceptional.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we're all acknowledge that addressing one's mental health is important, and we've started to talk about that as a community. But like you, Gavin, I was not aware that let's say that end of our population had such significant problems. We're all aware, and it gets so much commentary in relation to young males and males in younger males in general around their mental health. But I think any initiatives that addresses that and improves quality of life is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Pensioners obviously moving into the aged care, we're talking about retirement, etc. Pensioners also got a little bit of a leg up last night as well, Steve.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think this concept of retirement, Gavin, is changing. The traditional model was you work to 65, you stop working, you got the age pension, and that's kind of transition that you got some age pension and perhaps use some of your own resources. But what we're seeing more and more of is people actually transitioning to perhaps working differently at a certain point in their life. They might work less hours, or they might do a bit of contract work here or there to supplement let's say that transition to retirement. And what this is really allowing those who are of age pension age is to earn an extra $50 a fortnight. It was $250, now $300, and that not impacting their age pension in any way, shape or form. So again, acknowledging that increasingly growing segment of our economy, and an important one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for people who are moving into retirement, the ability to maximise retirement income by combining pension income and obviously earnings off their own superannuation, retirement savings is really important. So this will take the pressure off a little bit about not concerning them about that.
Absolutely. I think it's important though to know that what we're talking about is actually gainful employment. So we're not talking about earnings from investments. We're talking about continuing to work in whatever capacity that looks like once you've reached that particular age.
Yeah, and there's also some initiatives announced or proposed around helping support pensioners into some form of workplace as well. So there was a couple of items in that space. So I think more detail to follow on that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The last one we'll talk about was the power subsidy, the $400 per household. Did you give a bit of the insight on that one, Steve?
Yeah, so again, this is not
kind of buried in the
it was. I kind of heard Mr. Morrison kind of talk about it in his speech, but there hasn't been a lot of commentary in the mainstream press around it. So they've got this. It's called the National Energy Guarantee, And what it's saying is that on average, they're expecting that there'll be, as a result of the initiatives of that, a $400 reduction per household in annual energy costs. So, look, there's been, again, that's another area where there's been a lot of commentary about what's happened in that space. So I think most households will welcome any respite that they get in that regard. So, again, a little bit scant in the detail, but it sounds like there's going to be some relief coming for all of us in that space, which can only be a good thing.
Yeah, all in all, Steve, I think it was a pretty balanced budget. I think it definitely did err on the side of caution, but obviously try to please as many people as it could. And as we said up front, there is an election looming. Some of these initiatives that are proposed over a 7-year time period could in fact mean that there's been 3 elections in that period as well. So as we know, election cycles are getting shorter and shorter, and let alone prime ministers. But we won't cover that one.
No, we don't have time on this podcast for that.
But lots going on.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think the message that the government was trying to put across last night is that the economy is in generally a pretty good state. There will be obviously a deficit next financial year, but looks like they're looking to have a small surplus the financial year after that. So we're getting closer to that point of balancing the books, which you think about that for your household income. If you are balancing the books, or there's a little bit left over at the end of payday, then that generally has a positive impact, and the economy is no different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's been a little bit of talk and commentary about the economic forecasting. I saw a really good graph on the ABC last night about the economic forecast that came out at each budget, and how bullish they were about the economy in the next 12 months. Scott Morrison did a really good job of playing down their economic forecast and saying that we've actually taken a very conservative view. So he's of the opinion that the good times are going to continue, and there's no reason to say otherwise just yet. But as we said up front, this is all proposed at this time. It's got to go through the process of government, upper and lower house, to be approved and put in. Some of those initiatives that we talked about did have a timeline starting July 1, so they've got a bit of work to do if they're trying to convince crossbenchers, etc., to get on board. But apart from that, I think pretty fair. What do you reckon? Yeah, no,
I think a pretty balanced approach, and as I said, for most of us, there's likely to be some incentive.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, thanks for joining us this afternoon. It's good to get your insights, and thanks for tuning in to Conquering Your Financial Future, and we'll hopefully see or hear from you next time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.